Thank you. And I think we're going to just go without a mic if that's so, if everybody can hear, and we'll play that as the day goes on. Thanks, thanks, Mark, for that. And it's been really great to work with AABP over the years. Actually, this is, I think, the 6th time we've done this in my career. We started back in the 90s, and so it's been a great group to work with, and we've as you say, I do this talk quite a bit, or this kind of give this kind of information. What we found is that the most effective thing we do is hands-on workshops for farmers, and so that's partly, what you're going to see is partly what we use to try to get people engaged, and just to encourage you to, help your clients seek out educational opportunities, and there's a lot of this going on in pretty much every region of the country, and it's certainly available. As you say, there's tons of interest in regenerative now, and whatever that means, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So, my history is I am from this area of Southern Virginia, right on the North Carolina border, but actually I grew up in northern Arizona. So I worked on ranches and that sort of thing. Got interested in cows when I was a child, and then figured out how to work that into a tobacco farm that my parents had bought and brought us in summer to stare. And so everything I do has evolved out of that, and started. I tell people I was a farmer when I was 8 years old. I identified as a farmer, and I've never identified as anything else. So I've been at the university 35 years, and I still say I'm a farmer and a professor second. But it's been I've had a great career, trained a lot of good students. Mary Drunowski, you're going to hear from later, is one of those that was with us some time ago and has gone on to have a great career. So it's been a really fun time. And my role this first talk is to just get us all thinking about some of the big concepts associated with grazing. Some of it will be specifically what are the benefits, but introduce some of the ideas of nutrient cycling and animal management with electric fence or some of the newer technology that might be out there. We'll talk about that. But this Amazing Grazing program was started in the 80s by colleagues of mine that were in the crop science department. They went and did sabbatical in New Zealand and came back with all kinds of ideas about temporary fencing and rotational grazing, and after going to some place where that's just the culture, and then coming back to a place where that was absolutely not the culture. I mean, people just had cows out in pasture and didn't do much with them and took it all for granted. So they were frustrated with it. After 5 or 6 years, they didn't get much adoption, and Chris, like a lot of extension programs, they went on to something else. And then the first time that this was done at AABP, I did it with Dr. Glenn Rogers. Some of you probably know who he is. He was president of the organization a few years ago, I think. But Glenn really got into this grazing thing, working with us. And we were in my office planning the seminar for AABP, and we got to have a name. We got to have a name that's just going to catch people. And we were standing in my office, and there was a bumper sticker on the wall that said Amazing Grazing from the old program. And he just went, that's it. So that's what we called it. And then after that, we revived the program, and it all kind of started from that. So I guess that's all thanks to kind of AABP that we do that. But it's more than that. And you all know this. You go out to some of these folks that are really good with their forages and with grazing management, and it's just amazing. And to farmers that don't have the ability to manage animals like this, it seems like that would never work for them. I mean, they're like, yeah, that would never work for me. But it certainly can. It can work for everyone. And there's some massive benefits of everything that's going on in this pasture, which is nothing special, just some mixed tall fescue pasture there in Southern Virginia, but a lot of management coming together all in one place. And so the challenge is, how does somebody that has cows roaming around that are completely out of control, how do you get to here? And that's the challenge we have with our clients. And it's actually could have left this one out, similar type situation, but this, I guess the example here, these are some finishing cattle actually that they're eating whole cottonseed. They're under a wire as a supplement, because we know that's not going to quite get the performance that we need on those kind of cattle. And I stop at this farm on my way home from the main farm every day, and I spend about 30 minutes with this group of cattle, and then I go on home. And so if you do the cost of production in this setting, it's very low. Needless to say, right now, with a good market for these grass-finished or pasture-finished animals, we're really doing great right now, of course, with the prices like they are. But the key to it is that our costs are low. And there's a lot of other people that are, enjoying the high prices, but their costs are so high that when it comes back down, they're going to be singing the blues again. So there is we really need to develop these systems. And if you start being a little more creative and using the resources that you have, such as nutrients around a feeding area. This is an area that gets used for some winter feeding where we stage our AI heifers in the wintertime. So we do some hay feeding there and such, and we come back in with crabgrass, with a forage-type crabgrass, and we enjoy a tremendous amount of forage production on that spot in the summer with no fertilizer and no any other kind of inputs, and with a good rationing system to ration that out. Again, very, very high quality feed, and we have the ability. Chris, is an early March picture on ryegrass, and we are in a fescue area. But if you strategically have a little bit of ryegrass in your system, you can get started grazing at least 30 days earlier than folks that depend on just the perennials. So a lot of ways of stitching together these kinds of programs and concepts. And wherever you are, you're in different worlds. Some of you are more similar to mine, like Indiana, of course, Lexington, North Carolina. But no matter where you are, these same concepts fit and can be applied, especially when animals are being managed on the higher productive ground. A lot of western ranches have wet meadows and those kinds of things where there is a lot of forage production, and it can be these concepts can be very useful. But it is, we know that this is good for overall profitability of the farm to have a good, thoughtful grazing management program. You'll burn less fuel, have a little lower feed costs, certainly can reduce your fertilizer costs. You'll get better forage utilization. In other words, more of the grass that grows will go down the throat of a cow, and that's an important part of the system. And then also the pastures will have a longer life and be more productive if their management is appropriate. And Chris is going to talk a lot about that pasture growth and why that's so important. Important to this crowd, the health and well-being of the animals is a really important difference between the farm where people are really stockpiling, grazing in the winter, doing those sorts of things versus just traditional 150-day hay feeding. We have better nutrition out there for them in the forage, but we have a lot of reduced disease problems. We don't have near the calf scours when cows are being managed like this than we do when they're around a sloppy lot, and then everybody kind of understands how that works. So much better on calves. Certainly cow comfort is a big issue in the wintertime when it's wet. And one of the most important pieces to me is that health problems are very quickly noticed. When you spend a lot of time with the cows and you move the cows a lot, that first day lame shows up. And if she gets taken care of that day, oftentimes there's no retreat, there's no problem, everything's good. Same with pink eye. We have people that wait till they have like half the herd of pink eye. They call the vet, oh crap, I got pink eye, what do I do? Well, you treat the first one when you see it. And that's the key to treating pink eye, as we all know. So seeing those animals and having them used to being very close to you is one of the most important things of the whole system. And finally, mental health, certainly the health of the farmer that's out there, especially in the wintertime, but other times, and I'll mention that a little bit at the end. There are also environmental benefits. These are oftentimes called ecosystem services that are kind of donated to the rest of society. And so the benefits on water quality and reduced runoff, improvements in the water cycle are really important to this. Having that better nutrient distribution out there on pastures reduces the amount of nutrients that are lost to the surface water, and then improved soil health is very important from a carbon sequestration standpoint and that sort of thing. So a lot of the concepts of regenerative grazing are right there. I mean, this is really what this is all about, and it is amazing how much you really can get out of it. Let's see. There we go. So the kind of the thing I wanted to say to get into the rest of the talk is it's incredibly important what's going on under the surface, Chris, and you're going to talk a lot about that. We've got some stuff up here. We'll talk a little bit about different rooting types, but these are, you see this little box laying here. This is, I got some other pictures, but this was the one I enjoy seeing a little cowboy's face there when I see this one. But this is called a root box, and you see it's got clear plexiglass panels, and we plant a plant in there and watch the roots grow all summer. And so this is basically starting over a new batch for the coming educational year. This one was overgrazed over much of the previous summer, and then this is kind of rested all winter. But it's nevertheless that's the state of that one. This one was allowed to grow and just grazed about every 3 weeks all through the previous summer, and then rested the winter. And the amount of root mass there is, gosh, I don't know, Chris, we didn't try to weigh this or whatever, but it's 4 or 5, it's amazing. I mean, there's the root box is packed with roots all the way down 3 feet deep with this one, and this one, when you take it out, it just kind of crumbles apart, and there's just not many roots there. So this understanding how to manage to keep these very, very deep roots is critical to the system, and so again, Chris is going to talk about that. Now, Mark, if you will watch the time, because I don't have a clock, and I don't want to keep looking at my phone. So just when I got about 10 minutes left, let me know so I don't go over time. So this terminology, Chris, I love this slide, and I have to keep changing it. It gets too long, and I have to add some new ones. So, when we first started talking about this, when those guys came back from New Zealand and all, we were talking about intensive grazing. And everybody was into, this intensive grazing. Well, pretty quick, people are like, I don't want anything intensive. It just gave them this mental picture that this is just too much. These cows are a sideline. I don't want to spend that much time. I don't want to do anything intensive. So then Jim Garish coined management intensive grazing, which meant it's not that intense of a life sacrifice to make, but it is using management intelligently. And so MIG is what a lot of people still refer to that, and that's more traditional rotational grazing. In our world, maybe you have 21 to 28 days rest, and you have a short grazing period, and it's kind of a well-defined system. But it's not. It's also very flexible. The intensive word still, people are still like, no, I don't want to do this intensive stuff. I want to do something less intensive. So we just started talking about managed grazing. Controlled grazing is what we called it for many years. And then Chris, about 20 years ago, we started hearing mob grazing, and where now you would see regenerative, it was all mob grazing. And so this is a little different, involves longer rotations and higher stock density. And again, we'll get back to that. But that really changed. That one was really different. That was where we had these folks that were really mobbing up cows into 100 cows on 1/10 of an acre, moving several times a day and all of that, and pretty intensive, but nevertheless was the craze. Well, more recently, we call what we talk about adaptive grazing, and I'll talk about what that is, but AMP grazing is another one that you see very frequently now, adaptive multi-paddock grazing. And then, most recently regenerative, and then also now there's one called total grazing. Don't know if y'all have seen that one, but that one's a lot. A lot of that's more from the West, and involves very high stock density and very non-selective. So basically, just going through and wiping out everything and moving on, maybe not coming back for a year or more. So the point of all of this is that this is all the same basic thing. And so you don't get into argument with people about terminology, whether they're regenerative or not, or it's all basically the same thing, and it's all built on the idea of a very short grazing period. Duration of grazing is short, and the rest period is long, and that is relatively long. And that's really what allows those roots to develop and allows the plants to rest and express their ability. And so everything we're going to talk about is back to this kind of an assumption and that kind of a concept. So conceptually, that's really what we're talking about is taking control of how long the grazing period is. But maybe, Chris, we need to be telling people, well, what you really need to worry about is how long the rest period is. Because it's easy to do a long rest period. It's more challenging to do a short grazing period. But maybe there's some psychology there we can use. But nevertheless, I'm sure there's new ones that are going to be coming out probably next week, and so people will be like, have you never heard of this kind of grazing? So there is something to the mob grazing. I wanted to mention a little more detail on this because we still have people that use this technique, and I prefer to call it this rather than regenerative. And we'll talk because this is basically what the folks that say we're regenerative grazers, and I'll give you an example, would be people like Alan Williams is one of the most well-known of those guys, but Greg Judy also is another one. And the idea is all of that is based on this very high stock density. And so this is a picture actually from a demo that I did at NC State back at this time. And we had about 30 cows, and they were getting around 1/10 of an acre or so a day was a typical amount that I gave them. And I learned a lot from this. What I learned is that cows, at first, they're very uncomfortable like this. You put them in a pen, and they're used to being out in hundreds of acres. They're not comfortable that close together. They like to be able to get away from each other when somebody starts butting them or whatever. So you start putting them in this scenario. The first few weeks of this, it was not going good. I mean, they were fighting, and they'd tear down fences and all kinds of stuff. And I was like, yeah, this is not going to work. And then I went out there one day, and I gave this. It might have been this very move, but it was sometime during this time when I just saw everybody immediately went to eating. There was no discomfort in the group. Everybody just decided, okay, we're all in this together, and I'm going to eat that before she does. And they got into this very non-selective grazing behavior where they would just eat. They would just eat stuff you would never dream that they would eat. So this is, and so we just let it stockpile up ahead of them and used it when we needed it. And this is a midsummer fescue, a lot of weeds and stuff in here. And this is what they would do after a day of movement like that. And it was very, very efficient in terms of how much we got. And there were things that we just couldn't believe. So this is a Carolina horse nettle, which is a very prickly plant that grows out there. And doggone, they were eating that stuff. And I tested it, Chris, and this was like 16% crude protein. And so if that was the whole diet, they would starve to death probably. I mean, horse nettle is pretty rough stuff to try. I mean, you can get it in your hands and everything's pretty bad. But if they eat a little bit of that with all of that lower quality grass, then it actually becomes a diet, And so there's probably some positive feedback in their system that says eating a little bit of that is okay. And we're going to talk about that too because it's a poisonous weed. We never had any kind of health problem. So it doesn't make that much sense. Now, you got to be a little bit cautious and understand with this that once animals get into this non-selective grazing behavior, they'll eat stuff that they normally would not eat. This is a kind of an example of that, but actually this one's pretty palatable, but at young stages. But this is a hemp dogbane that is they call it little milkweed where I'm from, but it's supposed to be extremely poisonous. And these are some of our steers, and over again the 30 years of moving animals around this stuff, I'm not scared. I'm not worried about it at all anymore, even when there's this much of it, and they eat it. So you don't want them to. There's some stuff you probably don't want them to eat, so you got to be a little bit cautious about this. But certainly, they do lose some of their selective grazing behavior when you have them on a daily move. So, regenerative grazing. Let's back up and talk a little bit about that because I think that this actually is something different than all of those other things, and the difference is that the goal here is the land, is to heal the land and to make it more productive. Not so much to raise good livestock or any of those other things, but really to focus this thing on how do we build the system from the soil up. Understanding that almost all of our ag lands are in a degenerated state. And that's why we have to put so much fertilizer on. That's why we use so much herbicides. All of that stuff is related to the fact that we wore the land out. So our ancestors, when this land was new, it was amazing. And you were getting 100 bushel corn out of Virginia with no fertilizer, Chris. And I've got a good friend that his family, they made their whole fortune on farming in the swamp with no fertilizer and growing corn. So it is possible. There was a lot more productivity in this land, and that's pretty much everything that's been tilled and farmed actively. So that again, put it in your own perspective. But even where I'm from in northern Arizona, we leased a ranch for a long time where they raised pumpkins and potatoes on some open parks up on the side of the San Francisco peaks. And that land was just as worn out as our tobacco land in North Carolina because of all the tillage over 50 or 60 years. So it can happen anywhere. So it's really based on this principle of soil health and building that in your system. And the long-term goal is, again, to regenerate this kind of a system that will be self-perpetuating, that you don't need all of those inputs to try to get that productivity. And so really it's more than just what you do. It's this vision that this land can be better, and if I do this, we'll get there. And so that's really the key to it. So we're going to come back to that. So all this stuff we're going to have a lot of discussion about as we go through the day. But I want to make sure we understand that this idea of adaptive management is probably one of the most important skills that we can get into our farmers. And basically what that is a style of management that's different than what a lot of us have been trained with. So it's really the best approach when there are a whole lot of variables in any system that you can't control. And so it's much bigger than just grazing. I mean, it's any system, and the concept really comes out of range management and the wildlife people. But when you have things like rainfall and temperature and stuff that you really are out of your control, then you have to be ready to respond to that when it doesn't go like it's supposed to, right? So with traditional management, we have a real detailed plan. We know exactly what we're going to do. We source our, take a treatment protocol, say for a stocker operation. I mean, they kind of are supposed to, at least they should, have first the drug they go to first, then what they go to for retreatment. It's written out. It's well planned. They've got the stuff on stock. And so that lends itself to traditional management. But grazing really requires that you can change your direction or change what your short-term plan is smoothly and quickly without spending a lot of time, wasting a lot of time worrying about what are we going to do if it doesn't rain. Well, you know what you're going to do if it doesn't rain. If it doesn't rain, you just do it every day. You just start to adapt and change that approach. And so the long-term goal remains the same. You still are trying to get a certain size calves, or for me it's a certain number of finishers on the date that they're due at the plant. But I don't know exactly how we're going to get there. And it does kind of drive you crazy a little bit, but it's every single day or every time you're out there that needs to be going on in your mind. And I'll tell you, the way that people are like, you don't have time. How do you ever find time to do that? Well, I do it subconsciously. I don't even have to make myself think about it. And again, how do we get our clients up to that point? So one of the things that we really preach with this program is to learn the principles and understand what's going on, but don't get hung up on you got to move them every day, or you got to move them twice a day, or you should never do this, or you should always do something else. It's got to be more flexible to that. So just a quote, I won't waste time reading it, but basically if you understand the principles, there's a whole lot of ways you can get to the destination. And if you keep the principles in mind, a lot of these different approaches work. So the debate over which style grazing system you use, the truth is they both work, Chris. So how are you ever going to get that? How are you ever going to get that done? So one of the quotes that we always use is basically, when it comes to these systems, never say never and never say always. Now, with certified organic production, several of you mentioned that you've got that list, but certainly a lot of our others don't, and so we need to be careful that number one, we don't philosophically throw away all the tools that we might use, and so that's a very important concept again with this adaptive management. Okay, has everybody heard about soil health? How many of you know everybody knows kind of what soil health is? So I won't spend a lot of time on that. But again, this is the key to the regenerative thing is really taking the control. Let's build soil. And so the principles are to keep it covered, minimize disturbance, promote the diversity of biology out there, keep those living roots in the ground, again, very critical part of the system. If you're not farming, certainly integrating livestock, and we are seeing a lot of this being done now with cropland. A lot of cover crops being planted, and then those farmers are actually able to take some grazing leases or work out a deal with a neighbor or something like that. So we're getting more of that, and we'll talk about technology to do that. I mean, fencing is one of the key things, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But some of the things about soil health that are indicators that you can look at are like the color and the evidence for biological activity, soil structure, rooting, and indicator plant species is another real important one. Smell, I don't know. I'm not as good. It all smells good to me. So, but we do know there's certain plants that will tell you that there's certain problems in the soil, and there's a lot of information out there on this. So if your clients don't think about that, it's probably important. One of the things that we've had a lot of academic debates about this, Chris, about rotational grazing, and is it really worth doing or whatever, and this idea that again the regenerative folks say, well, you have to do this to build soil health. You just have to do that. So we've been doing quite a bit of research, and we kind of what we have found is that a higher level of forage management can improve soil health and in general. So no management versus some management, putting some grazing management in seems to be important, and we can measure that. But what's really important is the age of the pasture. So as these pastures stay in place longer and longer and longer and are managed well over that time, it kind of builds on itself. So the roots get deeper, the soil gets better, and over time, and it looks like somewhere around 20 years is an important amount of time. After that, things are probably about as good as they're going to get. But there is this evolution of that soil health over time. Now, most of the direct research comparing rotational stocking, as it's called in the academic world, versus continuous stocking, don't show there's very much difference in this. And if you do a literature review, you'll say there's not much difference between continuous grazing and rotational grazing. And that, the people that really would just rather not have to deal with rotating cows, they use that, they and most of them being academics and don't even have cows. But anyway, we'll get into that. But what they do see is there's better forage utilization. More of the forage consumed more of the forage grown is consumed, and then there's better plant diversity. Legumes stay in the system better, forbs stay in better, and that sort of thing. So there are some benefits, but soil health strictly is probably not the biggest one. It's going to come down to just do you take care of the land or not. And so what we know though is this rotational stocking, and this is the answer for my colleagues that think that you shouldn't have to rotate cows around. There's a lot to it other than just the soil health. So there's a lot of other aspects like improved animal behavior, and then that human interaction with the system that are very important. Okay, I got 10 minutes. I'm going to keep motoring through here. So again, today hopefully we'll be thinking about this in an ecological perspective. I'm not going to read that because you all know what it is, but pasture is a very managed ecosystem. And the definition of that is it's a system where the humans actively intervene and control key aspects of the environment. And that's what these are. That's what these systems are, is managed ecosystems, whether it's range or pasture in our world. That human is important. And this is the problem. This is what we have to work with for clients, right? They're outside the fence. There's cows and there's grass. Everything's okay. And that's a lot of times they're thinking about, gosh, calves are bringing a lot right now, and I got to go get my new bull, and I've got the vets coming because I got a cow that's lame or whatever. They really are outside the system. So they don't recognize that there's all this cool stuff going on. There's things like dung beetles and the wildlife and the spiders that are just early in the morning on these pastures. It's unbelievable. A healthy pasture is just loaded with insect life. So this is really what's going on. And the problem is, here they still are. And this obviously was made for farmers, but that's where they still are. And really where they need to be is there. And I don't mean that, I don't mean that only literally. Literally, they need to be out there. There needs to be some immersion inside of that. And they need to also realize that, okay, I'm the one that has an impact on all of these things. The wildlife, the earth, the soil, all of that. It's not the cow's responsibility to manage all of that. It's the human. And so this is a key. The key to the Amazing Grazing program is this is where we want to leave people and give them some tools and understand that their interest is what's going to drive them to do it, not because they're going to make more money or any of those kinds of things. Most of our farmers are in this for the fun of it. So we use dung beetles as our hook. This is still, Chris, it never fails. You got a bucket full of dung beetles, you will have a crowd that leaves and says, I want to go home and do something about this. Okay, so again, my little friend Cowboy there that helps me to do all this crazy stuff. But we do a lot of stuff with dung beetles, like ant farms and buckets where we show brood balls and larvae and stuff, and get people realizing that biology out there is really, really important. And so again, we'll have more discussion about that, I think, as we go along. The next key area is the nutrient situation, the nutrient stuff. And this was a farm that Mark and I worked on, and actually goes back to Dr. Rogers' time when we did around 2000. This is the phosphorus imprint, or the phosphorus levels on those pastures at our beef unit. Blue and green are very high, probably higher than plants even need. This is a typical index for us, Chris. Over 70 is not going to give you any production response. So if it's orange, it needs fertilizer. If it's green or blue, it's high, and if it's yellow, it doesn't need it. And so we have these very poorly distributed soil nutrients out there, and anybody's farm looks like this because that's where manure falls. So where animals stand around a hay feeder, they severely enrich the soil. I'll give you another example. This is another one of our research stations, and each one of these little dots is where an individual soil sample was taken. This was done with Dr. Franz Lubers, one of our colleagues there that is a soil ecologist. And then I'm going to show you again the phosphorus levels. Those obviously are where they're feeding round bales, and those are hay storage. That's hay storage barns right there. So you can imagine there's a gate there, and it's the shortest distance to a little hill where they can put out hay. Typical of the way folks manage. Well, that's the phosphorus indexes. So each one of those circles, the area of that represents the level of phosphorus. So again, these are those hot spots. And then there's down here where we're not getting good forage production because phosphorus is too low. So again, everybody's farms look like that. Nobody can, they can't see it until you show them this, and then they think, well, gosh, yeah, those plants down there are mighty small and yellow, and up here it's all weeds growing up over your head in the summertime. And they just, again, sometimes the light will go off. And folks, we do have folks that are adopting this and doing quite a bit. This is my own cows here, but once you end up with animals that are used to this, it's amazing. It's really amazing what you can do with them and the benefits of some of the advanced things that we do. So we do a lot of hay unrolling. This is basically the same field that you saw those cows in the last slide, where a lot of hay's been unrolled. And then we are also using a technique called bale grazing. Big research project going on with this right now with 5 states, but here's where the bales have been grazed, and we've got them on rings, and then these are just moved, and there's a temporary fence that keeps them off of there. And that allows us to spread all the nutrients from that hay feeding across a much bigger area. And all of that is very beneficial. Now the last little bit, Mark, I'm going to go over maybe 2 minutes, but I want to show this. So we've got a program we call the Power of One Wire, and this was Johnny's invention, but he realized that a lot of our cattle people, they're into the forage production part, but they're so much more into the cattle part that what can we do to hook them? So So the Power of One wire basically is, the idea is you go into existing pastures and you start just splitting pastures when you first start. And of course you get the benefits of the cows learning that when you go out there you're going to move a fence and then they can move to the other side. And just that process of getting them used to walking past you and being drawn to that movement starts to change their behavior dramatically. And basically you get some of these benefits from very little extra work. So you get the increased rest, you get the doubled stock density, and you start learning how to use that fence without spending very much or really doing very much. And needless to say, most of our farmers actually have electric perimeter fences, so that helps. It's not that way everywhere, but certainly this is an important first step for a lot of people. And then, once you have animals that are trained to polywire, you can start doing things like, if you've got a lame cow, you can take her out of the pasture. Two people can basically run that wire. If you've only got one, you can hook it at the gate right here, and you can just get around that animal and reel them in. And it doesn't even have to be on. They respect it. This is a little dark for this room, but you can see the wire right here, and this is my nephew and my two helpers, and with a cow-calf pair. Cow was lame. We cut her out of a group of 100 and took her about 300 yards to catch pen. No problem. Took us about 10 minutes, and she never balked. So once they are used to this, then they do that. In the working pen, used to take about 5 of us. Mark, you recognize this spot probably in our working pen. Used to take 5 of us. Now 2 of us can work them because we use this poly wire, and they're just so trained to go down to respect it. That's obviously not hot. So, we come back to this question, Chris, Mary, all of us. Why don't people do this? And my gut feeling is they just don't understand how cool this whole thing is, and so we have this new group of people. They call themselves regenerative, or they identify that way. Homesteaders, all other kinds of people in our state that are realizing, wow, this is an incredible opportunity for my kids to learn about ecology and bugs and all of those kinds of things. And so we are starting to see pretty big adoption of that. The reason that we do it at home is because I fought with my dad for decades about this. And he finally convinced himself that it was really worthwhile. And then I had a key nephew that came that was a city kid, and he came and he realized this was his goal, right, was to spread manure around evenly. And he did not have that idea that, well, that seems crazy. That's not what my buddies do. And so we do, I'm going to finish on this idea of the sort of the lifestyle or the benefits to the mental health. And certainly situation like this, Chris, where everything's come together. It rained. The clover that we never put out grew somehow. Cows are trained. Cows are in good shape and everything. I got a lot of problems in my life, right? I got personal problems. We got our whole country. We're whichever side you're on, or if you're in the middle or whatever. It's not, There's very little opportunity for this feeling, and I get it frequently. And so that, to me, that's what I realize. The people that really get into this, that's what they're after. And so, again, young family that I'm working with, try to help them get started. Replacement heifers here, Bred AI, good health program, ryegrass, no feed supplement needed here, Chris. And you know what? That's a pretty good day. Pretty good day. Hard to find stuff wrong with that. So to finish, I want to stress that this adaptive grazing management has great potential to improve, reduce our cost of production, and that's probably the one thing that most people will notice and think about. But also, I think this single-strand electric fence is a key management tool that we can use in many different ways, and certainly with where cattle prices and stuff are, it's a great time to invest some time, some money in building a better system. And And that may mean renovating pastures, it may mean adopting some better fence technology or whatever, but certainly this is the time to do it. And we need to start learning more about it now. So in your flash drive, you'll have a little sheet in there that's a front and back page handout type thing that has links to a lot of different stuff, a lot of much longer talks on each of these things than we can do today. It also has stuff about dung beetles and bearing underwear to test for soil health and all kinds of interesting things. So take a look at that, and Mark, let's move on. Okay, and I just want to tell y'all, we have built time for questions in. So we when we put together the agenda, we decided rather than have 40-minute talks, let's just make them 30 and then have some time left. So we'll have plenty of time to discuss all this, Mark. So let's just go on and get into more details. Okay? Yes. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Yep. Okay, so the first thing is to really get a handle on soil fertility, and make sure that they understand how to take soil samples, and just do a basic. I mean, just for our most, let's just call it tame pasture situation where fertilizer is an option. That's one of the first things that they need to start doing that. At the same time. You need to help them assess what they currently have, because a lot of them, they've got some level, they're doing some of this kind of stuff. Maybe they've got at least multiple pastures and that sort of thing. So that, and then getting them thinking about grouping animals up more, because a lot of our farmers will have 6 pastures and they have 6 different groups of cows, so they don't really have a way of rotating. So getting them to start thinking about that, collapsing down into fewer groups, so that they have more opportunity to rest pastures.
That's a problem with our animal scientists. I mean,
Yeah.
scientists want to divide all.
They want them to divide them, yeah, and we'll talk about that as we go. So, Chris, do you want to add to that? So, Mary, what do you add? What will you add? What do you add to that? I mean.
Well, I don't know. I guess I was just thinking, what's the intent, right? You were talking about short duration grazing, long rest period, and I think that we also talk about flexibility, and I don't know that they always understand what is your goal, right? And so the flexibility is what's the pasture doing ahead of you, what's the pasture that they're in doing, right? So determining when it's time to just go, because you can have all your plans in the world, but sometimes, the grass is growing really well, we should just move on, we're going to come back, it's going to be a month before I get back here anyways, that's fine, versus, I want to give that a little bit more time, I can slow down a little bit. Some of those things to get in their mind about what is my goal, right? And my goal is to make sure that I'm not eating that plant multiple times in a short period, right? And that I'm not letting my forage get too mature if in the growing season I have high quality, an animal has high requirements, right? And so it's about managing, to me it's managing maturity and plant physiology, so it's we got to manage the animal and the plant all at the same time.
Yep.
Most of the time
Right.
they struggle with what is the key things that I should be doing.
Right. And I think that part of the reason for that is, again, the way that we're taught to learn, is to have, okay, I need to know this, and this. And I guess the guy that really got me pushed into sort of another level of thinking about this was Ray Archuleta when he started, he just kind of challenged me on, all those details don't really matter, it's the big principles that matter. And so you're getting so hung up on details that you're missing the principles. And some things we'll never know. There's certain things that we just we just will never know. Mixtures of annuals, for example. There's just so many possible combinations. We could never really research that and know. So arguing about what's the right percent of each thing in there is it's just spend a lot of time and you don't get there. So I think the question of how do you really get somebody started, or where does somebody start? Starting with a stockpile situation, say for winter grazing, would be the ideal one, and that can be done anywhere, right? It could be swath grazing or whatever, but getting them into that where they do then have a systematic movement of animals every day or every few days, so that they get out there and they actively work day after day and get to looking at that. Okay, did I give them enough? Did I give them too much? So that then it's kind of a case for them, rather than trying to do the whole ranch or the whole farm, because all of those concepts are, to us, that seem so obvious. As I say, I walk out there and all of that stuff's going on in my brain without me even knowing it. That's what's not happening with a client, that's not got that kind of background. So you got to get that started in them. And again, I think that what we've had the best luck with is stockpiled fescue, because it works great in our environment for winter feeding. But that's kind of what we would. So, yes. Yes, please do.
For the groups of cattle that are new to the of all the different groups that have done this for over the years, about how long does it take on average to get that non-selective grazing, where they're starting to eat things that they would?
Well, and I'll ask Mary and Chris to join in on this too, because there's not an exact thing, but it takes a few weeks. But it depends on how the farmer reacts, right? But after a few weeks, they catch it. The cows learn pretty quick. The system, cows like us, and I like. So the other thing, Mary, is I like a daily move, not because that's the most practical thing or because that's the way I always do it, but because if you start that way, you start to learn these things, right? You're there with the cows, you start to realize, well, that one right there, I can't put much pressure on her. She's going to go through that wire. That one there, I can walk up and touch, So you need to start to get to know the animals in that way. And it takes a couple of weeks for them to get used to you and get used to each other. It doesn't take a long time.
I'm asking to balance, okay, they want to eat the palatable forages, they want to eat non-palatable. But at what point you starve them to the point that they eat the non-palatable,
Right.
Them to maintain harmony?
Yep. So as I said, when I started doing it with that one group, and it's the only time I've ever taken a group that was a continuously grazed group and then turned them into this. It took a few weeks before they would do that. Like when they first went in there, they wouldn't touch horse nettle or pigweed or any of that other stuff. They ate all the grass, and then they were like, okay, we're done, whatever. And so it took several weeks before they started to do that.
But you don't want to sacrifice warmness.
No, that's correct. And so I was putting some pressure on them, and we started with a group of dry cows. So that may be another one, a group without baby calves, because calves don't understand for a while. It takes them a while to learn. But so the key to that was those were dry cows, and I was not too afraid for them to lose a body condition score or so. They were pretty fat coming off. But I don't think there's probably a magic answer to that. But it doesn't happen within days. It's probably weeks.